Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never imagined they could hurt you? Have you ever been so vulnerable, so exposed, that the people you thought would catch you when you fell were the same ones pushing you down? Let me tell you about the day my entire world shattered. The day I learned that the people closest to me were capable of cruelty I never thought possible. This is my story, and I'm sharing it because I know somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone, that betrayal doesn't define you, and that you have more power than you think. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened to me, what I did about it, and how it changed everything. This isn't just a story about revenge or getting even. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your voice, and your truth when everyone around you tries to silence you. It's about that moment when you stop being the victim and start being the architect of your own justice. So buckle up, because this journey is intense, emotional, and ultimately transformative. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, one of those crisp autumn days when the air smells like possibility and change. I was at my workplace, a mid-sized marketing firm where I'd spent the last 5 years building relationships, proving my worth, and genuinely believing I was part of a family. That's what they called us, a family. My manager Susan always talked about how we were more than colleagues. We were a tight-knit group that supported each other through thick and thin. I believed her. God, how naive I was. That afternoon, we were setting up for a major presentation, one of those career-defining moments that could lead to a promotion I'd been working toward for 18 months. The conference room was on the 3rd floor, and we were moving equipment, rearranging furniture, hauling monitors and projection screens up the narrow staircase because the elevator was broken. Of course it was broken that day. I remember the weight of the monitor in my arms, the way my muscles strained as I carefully navigated the stairs. My colleague Jake was ahead of me, and I trusted him to guide me, to warn me about the steps, to be my eyes since I couldn't see past the bulky equipment I was carrying. I trusted him. That trust was my first mistake. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly known in that moment, was that Jake had been plotting with others, that there were phones out, cameras ready, waiting for what was about to happen. I felt my foot catch on something, maybe his foot. Maybe he placed something there, I'll never know for sure, but what I do know is that it wasn't an accident. The monitor went flying. My body twisted in midair as I desperately tried to protect both the expensive equipment and myself, and I came crashing down on my left side, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact against the hard edge of the staircase. The pain was instant and overwhelming, radiating from my shoulder down my arm and up into my neck. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process anything, except the white-hot agony shooting through my body. And then I heard it, the sound that would haunt me for weeks to come. Laughter. Not gasps of concern, not rushes to help me, but laughter. Genuine, unrestrained, belly-laughing amusement at my pain. I looked up through tears that were already forming in my eyes, and I saw them. Jake, Susan, Maria from accounting, Tom from sales, all of them with their phones out, recording, laughing. Some of them actually bent over with the force of their amusement. "Did you see her face?" someone said between laughs. "That was priceless," another voice chimed in. I tried to stand, my injured arm hanging uselessly at my side, and the laughter only intensified. In that moment, lying on that staircase with my shoulder screaming in pain and my heart shattering into 1,000 pieces, something fundamental shifted inside me. The humiliation was crushing, suffocating. But beneath it, beneath the embarrassment and the hurt, something else was growing, something cold and determined. I didn't recognize it yet, but that was the moment I stopped being the person who trusted blindly and started being someone else entirely. Someone who would not forget, someone who would not forgive without justice, someone who would make sure that this moment, this betrayal, would not go unanswered. But I didn't show them any of that. Through the pain, through the tears that were now flowing freely down my face, I forced myself to laugh along with them. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, pretending that this was funny, that I was in on the joke, that my whole world wasn't crumbling around me. "It got me good," I managed to choke out, and they laughed even harder, thinking I was such a good sport, such a team player. The monitor was destroyed, the presentation was delayed, and I spent the next 4 hours in the emergency room getting x-rays and being told that I had a severe shoulder sprain, possible rotator cuff damage, and would need extensive physical therapy. The whole time sitting in that sterile hospital room with its fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, I kept replaying that moment in my mind. The laughter, the phones, the complete absence of concern or care. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people I'd celebrated birthdays with, people whose kids I knew by name, people I'd considered friends. And they had laughed. They had recorded my pain for their entertainment. They had turned my suffering into their joke. The doctor was talking to me about recovery time, about pain management, about how I needed to rest and avoid using my arm for at least 6 weeks, but I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, understanding that this wasn't just a cruel prank. This was something deeper, something more sinister. When I returned to work the next day, my arm in a sling and my heart encased in ice, they were all there, acting like nothing had happened. Susan asked how I was feeling with the kind of fake concern that made my skin crawl. Jake avoided eye contact. Maria gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I smiled back. I thanked them for their concern. I said I was fine, that accidents happen, that I'd be back to normal in no time. And while I said all these things, while I played the role of the gracious victim who bore no grudges, I was watching them, really watching them, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. I noticed the little glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, the barely suppressed smirks, the way they seemed to be waiting for something, expecting something from me. They wanted me to break down, to complain, to make a scene so they could label me as dramatic, as unable to take a joke, as someone who didn't fit in with the company culture. But I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I began to observe. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The dynamics of the office, who was really in charge, who had influence, who made decisions, who held grudges, who formed alliances. I noticed that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. There were stories whispered in corners about other people who had been targeted, who had left the company under mysterious circumstances, who had suddenly resigned after incidents that were always described as accidents or misunderstandings. There was Jennifer, who had quit 6 months ago after someone put a laxative in her coffee during an important client meeting. There was David, who transferred to another department after his personal emails were mysteriously leaked to the entire office. There was Sandra, who simply stopped showing up one day, and when I asked about her, people just shrugged and changed the subject. I began to understand that I had stumbled into something much larger than a simple prank gone wrong. This was a pattern, a culture of bullying and cruelty that was somehow sanctioned, or at least tolerated, from the top down, and I had become their latest target. The question was why? What had I done to deserve this? Or was it simply that I was there, vulnerable, trusting, easy prey for people who got their kicks from hurting others? I spent sleepless nights turning these questions over in my mind, my shoulder throbbing with pain that the medication could only dull, never eliminate. And in those dark hours, when the world was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I made a decision. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to transfer. I wasn't going to slink away like all the others before me. I was going to fight back, but I was going to be smart about it. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything, every interaction, every comment, every look. I wrote down dates and times, who was present, what was said, what was done. I became a detective in my own life, gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for a moment I knew would come, even if I didn't know exactly when or how. My shoulder healed slowly, painfully, each physical therapy session a reminder of what they had done to me, each twinge of pain fueling my determination. And through it all, I smiled. I laughed at their jokes. I participated in team meetings. I acted like everything was perfectly normal, because I knew that the moment they suspected I was onto them, the moment they realized I wasn't just another victim who would quietly disappear, they would close ranks, destroy evidence, rewrite the narrative. So I waited, I watched, I documented, and I planned. The thing about betrayal is that it changes you in ways you can't predict. Before that day on the staircase, I was someone who saw the best in people, who gave second chances freely, who believed that most people were fundamentally good, and that misunderstandings could be resolved with honest communication. That version of me died on those stairs. The person who emerged was harder, more cynical, but also more aware, more strategic, more determined to protect herself because she had learned the painful lesson that no one else would. I mourned that old version of myself sometimes, in quiet moments when I wasn't consumed with gathering evidence and planning my next move. I missed the innocence, the ability to trust without questioning, the lightness of spirit that comes from believing the world is essentially fair and just. But I also recognized that naivety had made me vulnerable, and I could never afford to be that vulnerable again. As the weeks passed, I began to notice patterns in their behavior. They targeted people who were isolated, who didn't have strong alliances within the company, who were too competent and might threaten someone's position, or too weak and made for easy victims. I fell into the category of competent, I realized. My work was good, sometimes better than those who had been there longer, and that had made me a threat. The incident on the stairs wasn't random, it was calculated. They had been waiting for an opportunity to humiliate me, to break me down, to force me out before I could advance too far. Understanding this was both devastating and empowering. Devastating because it meant the betrayal was even deeper than I'd thought, that people I'd respected had actively plotted against me. Empowering because it meant this wasn't about me being inadequate or deserving of mistreatment, it was about their fear and insecurity. I started reaching out to former employees, carefully, subtly, using LinkedIn and other professional networks to make contact without raising suspicion. I crafted my messages carefully, talking about catching up, about references for other opportunities, about staying connected. And slowly, carefully, people started talking. Jennifer told me about the laxative incident, but also about how she'd been systematically undermined for months before that, how her work had been stolen and presented as someone else's, how meetings had been scheduled without her, and decisions made without her input. David shared his story about the leaked emails, but also about how his performance reviews had been manipulated, how he'd been set impossible deadlines, and then blamed when he couldn't meet them. Sandra, who I finally tracked down working at a completely different industry, broke down crying when I called her, saying she'd never told anyone the full story of what had happened to her, how they'd created a hostile environment so toxic that she'd had panic attacks just thinking about going to work. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, another layer of understanding about how this organization functioned, who the key players were, and how they operated. Susan, my manager, wasn't just complicit, she was often the ringleader, using her position of authority to protect the perpetrators and silence the victims. HR was useless, I learned, either actively involved in the cover-ups or so incompetent that they might as well have been. The company's leadership either didn't know or didn't care, as long as the numbers looked good and nobody made too much noise. It was a perfect system for predators, a culture where cruelty was rewarded with loyalty and victims were blamed for their own mistreatment, and I was determined to expose all of it. Have you ever felt that kind of righteous anger, that burning need for justice that keeps you going even when you're exhausted and hurting? Comment below and tell me about it, because I want to hear your stories too. But I knew that righteous anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed evidence, real, concrete, undeniable evidence. So I started being more strategic. I began carrying a small recording device with me everywhere, legally of course. I made sure to research the laws in my state about recording conversations, and I was careful to only record in situations where I had a legal right to do so. I started backing up all my work emails to a personal account, creating a paper trail of my accomplishments and the obstacles that were being placed in my way. I documented every assignment, every deadline, every meeting, creating a chronological record that would be impossible to dispute. And most importantly, I started looking for the videos. I knew they had recorded my fall. I knew those videos existed somewhere, on someone's phone, maybe shared in a group chat, maybe posted on a private social media account. Finding them became my obsession. I created fake social media profiles, carefully crafted to look like other employees or friends of employees, and I sent friend requests, slowly building a network of connections that might give me access to the content I needed. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and attention to detail, and more than once I wanted to give up, to just quit and move on with my life. But then I'd move my shoulder wrong and feel that familiar stab of pain, or I'd overhear someone in the break room laughing about an inside joke that I suspected was at someone else's expense, and my resolve would harden again. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every person who had been hurt by this toxic culture, every victim who had been silenced, every bully who had gotten away with their cruelty because no one had the courage or the resources to stand up to them. 3 months after the incident, I finally found what I was looking for. One of my fake profiles had been accepted by Jake's girlfriend, and through her account, I was able to see a private group where employees shared videos and photos from company events. And there it was, multiple videos of my fall, taken from different angles, some of them slowed down to emphasize the moment of impact, others with added sound effects and commentary. The cruelty was breathtaking. They had turned my pain into entertainment, edited it like a comedy sketch, shared it with dozens of people who had all laughed and added their own cruel comments. I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen, watching myself fall over and over again, hearing their laughter over and over again, and I felt something inside me crystallize into absolute certainty. They were going to pay for this. Not with violence, not with personal revenge, but with exposure, with consequences, with justice. I downloaded everything. Every video, every photo, every comment. I took screenshots with timestamps. I documented who had posted what and when. I created a comprehensive digital portfolio of evidence that showed not just the incident itself, but the ongoing harassment, the celebration of my suffering, the casual cruelty that these people engaged in without any apparent shame or remorse. And as I compiled this evidence, I also reached back out to the former employees I'd spoken with, asking if they would be willing to provide statements, to go on record about their experiences, to stand with me if I decided to take action. Some said no, too traumatized or too afraid of retaliation to get involved, but others said yes, recognizing that this might be their chance to finally be heard, to finally have their experiences validated and their abusers held accountable. I consulted with an employment lawyer, paying for the initial consultation out of my own pocket, and I laid everything out for her. The videos, the statements, the documentation of the toxic culture, the pattern of harassment and retaliation. She listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and then told me something I hadn't expected. I had a case, a strong case, not just against the individuals involved, but potentially against the company itself, for fostering a hostile work environment and failing to protect employees from harassment. She warned me that it would be difficult, that companies had resources and lawyers and ways of making things messy, that I should be prepared for a long fight. But she also told me that cases like mine, with clear evidence and multiple witnesses, were exactly the kind that could create real change, not just for me, but for everyone who came after me. I took a week to think about it, to really consider what I was about to do. Moving forward meant declaring war, burning bridges, potentially making myself unemployable in my industry if the company decided to retaliate with smear campaigns or legal threats of their own. It meant reliving the trauma over and over again as I told my story to lawyers and potentially in court. It meant exposing myself to public scrutiny and judgment, but not moving forward meant letting them get away with it, meant allowing the toxic culture to continue, meant abandoning all those other victims who had suffered in silence. When I thought about it that way, there was really no choice at all. I contacted the lawyer and told her I was ready to proceed. We filed a formal complaint with the company's corporate headquarters, bypassing the useless HR department entirely, and we included enough evidence to make it clear that this wasn't a baseless accusation or a disgruntled employee making trouble. This was serious, documented, and legally actionable. The response was immediate and revealing. Susan called me into her office the very next day, her face tight with barely controlled anger, and demanded to know what I thought I was doing, how I could be so disloyal to the team, how I was making problems where none existed. I recorded the entire conversation, of course, and her threats and attempts at intimidation only strengthened my case. HR suddenly wanted to schedule meetings to discuss my concerns, to find an amicable resolution, using all the corporate buzzwords that really meant they wanted to shut me up and make the problem go away as cheaply as possible. But I wasn't interested in being bought off or silenced. I had been patient for months playing their game, collecting evidence, and now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Within 2 weeks, the company launched an internal investigation, though I had little faith it would be conducted fairly given that the people doing the investigating were the same people who had allowed the toxic culture to flourish in the first place. But I had prepared for this. I had copies of everything stored in multiple locations. I had witnesses who were ready to speak, and I had a lawyer who knew exactly how to navigate the corporate bureaucracy and legal system. The investigation dragged on for weeks, during which time I continued to work, continued to smile and act professional, even as I could feel the hostility radiating from my colleagues who now knew I had reported them. Some people stopped speaking to me entirely. Others made passive-aggressive comments. A few actually confronted me directly, accusing me of being a troublemaker. of not being able to take a joke, of betraying the team. But there were also unexpected allies. A few people, mostly those who had themselves been targets or who had witnessed the harassment and been bothered by it but too afraid to speak up, quietly reached out to offer support. They shared their own stories, their own evidence, and some even agreed to provide statements to the investigators. I realized that the culture of silence had been maintained not because everyone was complicit, but because individual victims felt isolated and powerless. By speaking up, by refusing to be silenced, I had given others permission to do the same. This realization transformed my understanding of what I was doing. It wasn't just about personal justice anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of abuse that had harmed countless people. The investigation concluded after 6 weeks, and the results were mixed. Several people, including Jake, were given written warnings and required to attend sensitivity training, which felt like a slap on the wrist for what they had done. Susan was quietly transferred to another department, a lateral move that allowed her to save face while removing her from direct management of the team. The company issued a new policy on workplace conduct and harassment, complete with anonymous reporting mechanisms and promises of zero tolerance for bullying. On paper, it looked like change was happening. In reality, I knew it was mostly cosmetic, designed to protect the company from legal liability more than to protect employees from harassment. But it was something, more than the victims before me had gotten, and I took some satisfaction in that, but I wasn't done. The lawyer and I discussed next steps, and we decided to file a formal lawsuit, citing the hostile work environment, the company's negligence in protecting me, the ongoing retaliation I'd faced after reporting the incident, and the physical injury I'd sustained as a result of their actions. This was the nuclear option, the point of no return, and I knew it would make my life difficult in ways I couldn't fully predict. But I also knew that internal corporate investigations and policy changes weren't enough, that real accountability required external pressure, legal consequences, and public exposure. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, the story had been picked up by local media. Suddenly, my private battle was becoming public, and I had to decide how much of my story I was willing to share. I gave an interview to a local reporter, carefully with my lawyer present, telling my story in my own words, showing the videos that had been made of my fall and shared for entertainment, explaining the pattern of abuse that had affected multiple employees over years. The story ran that evening, and the response was overwhelming. My phone blew up with messages from strangers offering support, from other victims of workplace harassment sharing their own experiences, from advocacy groups wanting to help, from other media outlets requesting interviews. The company's stock took a minor hit, not enough to cause real damage, but enough to get the attention of the board of directors. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me or my team or even my office. It was about the company's reputation, its brand, its bottom line. The pressure worked. Within a week of the lawsuit becoming public, the company reached out through their lawyers with a settlement offer. It was substantial, enough to cover my medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and legal fees, with plenty left over. But the offer came with strings attached, a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever speaking publicly about what had happened, a non-disparagement clause that would prevent me from saying anything negative about the company, and a requirement that I resign immediately. I looked at that offer, at the amount of money that would have seemed like a fortune to me a year ago, and I felt nothing but contempt. They were trying to buy my silence again, just like they had tried to buy the silence of every victim before me, offering just enough to make the problem go away while admitting no wrongdoing and making no real changes. I rejected the offer. My lawyer thought I was crazy. She explained that going to trial was risky, that juries were unpredictable, that even with strong evidence I might lose, that the company had resources to drag this out for years, wearing me down financially and emotionally. But I explained to her what she already knew but maybe hadn't fully understood. This wasn't about money. This was about justice, about accountability, about making sure that what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else. We countered with our own demands: a larger financial settlement with no NDA, a public apology from the company acknowledging the toxic culture and the harm it had caused, the termination of the employees directly involved in the harassment, and the implementation of real, meaningful policy changes with external oversight to ensure compliance. It was a big ask, probably too big, but I figured if we were going to trial anyway, we might as well make them understand exactly what we wanted. The months that followed were brutal. The company fought back hard, hiring expensive lawyers who tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee, someone who couldn't handle the normal pressures of the workplace, someone who was exaggerating minor incidents for financial gain. They dug into my past, looking for anything they could use to discredit me, questioning my performance reviews, my relationships with colleagues, even my social media posts from years ago. They deposed me for hours asking invasive questions, trying to catch me in contradictions or get me to admit that maybe I was partly to blame, maybe I had been too sensitive, maybe I had misunderstood their intentions. It was exhausting and humiliating, and there were moments when I wanted to give up, to take whatever money they were offering and just make it all stop. But every time I felt myself weakening, I thought about Jennifer and David and Sandra and all the others who had been driven out before me, who had suffered in silence because they didn't have the resources or the evidence or the support to fight back. I thought about the people who had quietly reached out to me after my story went public, sharing their own experiences of workplace harassment and thanking me for having the courage to speak up. I thought about my younger self, the trusting, naive person I had been before that day on the staircase, and I fought for her, for the innocence that had been stolen from her, for the belief in fairness and justice that had been shattered. And I kept going. The trial date was set for 8 months after the lawsuit was filed, and in the weeks leading up to it, both sides engaged in intensive preparation. My lawyer prepped me on what to expect, how to answer questions, how to stay calm under cross-examination, how to tell my story clearly and emotionally without breaking down or becoming defensive. We reviewed the evidence over and over, making sure every detail was documented, every timeline was accurate, every witness was prepared. And then, 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, the company blinked. They came back with a new settlement offer, one that met almost all of our demands, a substantial financial settlement with no NDA, allowing me to speak freely about my experience, a public statement from the company acknowledging that they had failed to maintain a safe and respectful workplace, and apologizing to me and other employees who had been affected, the termination of Jake, Susan, and 2 other employees who had been directly involved in the harassment, the implementation of comprehensive new policies on workplace conduct, with annual training for all employees and managers, an independent hotline for reporting harassment, and quarterly audits by an external firm to ensure compliance. It wasn't everything we'd asked for, but it was close, closer than I'd ever really thought we'd get. I sat with the offer for days, discussing it with my lawyer, with the other victims who had provided statements and become invested in the outcome, with my family and friends who had supported me through the whole ordeal. Everyone had opinions. Some thought I should hold out for trial, go for the complete victory, make them pay even more publicly. Others thought I should take the deal, that I'd already won more than most people ever get in these situations, that the risk of trial wasn't worth it. In the end, the decision came down to what I had wanted from the beginning, not revenge, but justice. Not just for me, but for everyone. And this settlement, imperfect as it was, delivered that. It held people accountable. It created real change. It sent a message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. So I accepted it. The day the settlement was finalized, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly, that the long battle was finally over, that I could stop reliving my trauma over and over in legal proceedings and media interviews. Satisfaction that I had fought and won, that the people who had hurt me were facing real consequences, that the culture that had enabled them was being dismantled, but also sadness for the time and energy and emotional health I had lost, for the career I had once loved that was now irrevocably tainted, for the person I had been before all this started, who could never exist again, and underneath it all, a quiet sense of pride, because I had done something hard, something scary, something that most people don't have the courage to do, and I had seen it through to the end. The public apology from the company ran in the same newspapers that had covered the lawsuit, a full-page ad acknowledging their failures and committing to do better. Jake, Susan, and the others were quietly let go, their LinkedIn profiles soon showing new positions at other companies, carrying their toxicity with them to new victims who wouldn't know what they were getting into. That was the one thing that still bothered me, that these people could just move on and potentially hurt others. But I had done what I could. I had exposed them. I had created a public record of their actions that anyone who bothered to search could find. The rest was up to their new employers and future colleagues. I resigned from the company, Not as part of the settlement, but because I couldn't imagine continuing to work there after everything that had happened. The physical office, the people, even the work itself had all been poisoned by my experiences, and I needed a fresh start somewhere else. Finding that fresh start was harder than I'd anticipated. My lawsuit, while successful, had made me radioactive in some circles. Potential employers who Googled my name found articles about the case, and some of them clearly wondered if I was someone who would sue them too if things didn't work out. Others admired what I'd done and saw it as evidence of my integrity and courage, but worried about the baggage I carried, the trauma that might affect my work, the notoriety that might create problems. I had several interviews that seemed to go well until they suddenly didn't, offers that were almost extended and then mysteriously withdrawn. For a while, I worried that I had sacrificed my career for justice, that I would never work in my field again, that I had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, opportunities began to emerge. I was contacted by advocacy organizations working on workplace harassment issues, asking if I would speak at conferences, participate in panels, share my story to help others understand the dynamics of toxic workplaces and the importance of speaking up. I started doing freelance consulting, helping companies audit their workplace cultures and develop better policies for preventing and addressing harassment. I wrote articles about my experience, not sensationalized or self-pitying, but honest and instructive, offering practical advice to other victims about documenting abuse, seeking legal help, and protecting their mental health through the process. And eventually I found a new full-time position at a company that not only wasn't put off by my history, but actually valued it, seeing it as evidence that I was someone who would stand up for what was right, who would contribute to building a healthy workplace culture, who had the courage to be more than just a passive employee. The physical scars from my shoulder injury have mostly healed, though I still get twinges of pain when the weather changes, or when I push myself too hard at the gym. The emotional scars took longer to heal, and in some ways they never will completely. I had to work through a lot of trauma with a therapist, processing the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, and the grief for the person I used to be. I had nightmares for months, reliving that fall over and over, hearing their laughter, feeling that crushing sense of isolation and vulnerability. I developed trust issues that affected my relationships, always waiting for people to reveal their true selves, always holding part of myself back, always ready to document and defend against potential betrayal. It took time and work to learn how to trust again, to accept that not everyone is cruel, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that opening yourself to others is worth the risk, even knowing you might get hurt. Looking back now, more than 2 years after that day on the staircase, I can see how profoundly the experience changed me, mostly for the better, even though I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I'm stronger now, more aware, more strategic, more willing to stand up for myself and others. I'm less naive, which has costs, but I'm also less likely to be taken advantage of or to accept mistreatment as normal. I've built a career around helping others navigate workplace challenges, using my experience to give them tools and knowledge I wish I'd had from the beginning. And I've connected with an entire community of survivors and advocates who understand what it's like to fight back against systemic abuse, who support each other through the hard times and celebrate each other's victories. If I could go back and change what happened, would I? Part of me wants to say yes, wants to avoid the pain and trauma and difficulty of the whole experience. But another part of me recognizes that I wouldn't be who I am now without having gone through it, that the person I've become, stronger and wiser and more purposeful, was forged in that fire. I wouldn't have met the people I've met, wouldn't have helped the people I've helped, wouldn't have created the change I've created if I had just let it go and moved on. So maybe the question isn't whether I would change it, but what I've done with it. And I can honestly say I've tried to turn my pain into purpose, my suffering into service, my trauma into transformation. To anyone out there who is going through something similar, who is being bullied or harassed or abused in their workplace or anywhere else, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting, and you are not powerless. What is happening to you is real, and it's wrong, and you deserve better. Document everything, trust your instincts, reach out for help, and don't let anyone convince you that you're the problem. The people who hurt you are counting on your silence, on your fear, on your isolation. Don't give them that power. Speak up, stand up, and fight back, not with violence or cruelty, but with truth and evidence and the courage to demand accountability. It won't be easy. There will be days when you want to give up, when you question whether it's worth it, when you feel overwhelmed by the enormity of what you're facing. But you are stronger than you think. You have more allies than you know, and justice, real justice, is possible if you're willing to fight for it. And if you're someone who has witnessed harassment or abuse, who has stood by while others were hurt because you didn't know what to do or were afraid of the consequences of speaking up, I want you to understand that your silence makes you complicit. You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to put yourself at risk, but you can offer support to victims. You can provide witness statements. You can refuse to participate in or laugh at cruelty. You can create a culture where abuse is unacceptable rather than normalized. Every person who refuses to go along with toxic behavior makes it a little bit harder for that behavior to continue, creates a little bit more space for victims to feel safe speaking up. Be that person. Make a difference. Don't let fear or apathy turn you into someone who looks back with regret about what you could have done but didn't. I want to take a moment to talk directly to you, the person watching this video right now. Thank you for listening to my story, for giving me your time and attention, for being willing to hear about something difficult and painful and complicated. I know there are a million other things you could be watching, a million easier, lighter, more entertaining options, and you chose this. That means something. It means you care about these issues, or maybe you've experienced something similar, or maybe you're just someone who believes in justice and wants to understand the world better. Whatever brought you here, I'm grateful, and I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced workplace harassment or bullying? Have you ever witnessed it and struggled with what to do? Have you ever fought back against injustice and won or lost or found yourself somewhere in between? Share your story in the comments below, because every story matters. Every experience adds to our collective understanding, and every person who speaks up makes it easier for the next person to do the same. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or understand something new, please take a moment to hit that like button. I know it seems like a small thing, but it helps this video reach more people, helps other victims find it when they're searching for guidance, helps build a community of people who refuse to accept toxic workplace cultures as inevitable. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more real experiences from real people navigating the challenges of life and work and relationships and justice, please subscribe to Living Through It. This channel is dedicated to sharing authentic stories that matter, stories that inspire and inform and empower, stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video, because we're building something special here, a community of people who believe in truth and justice and the power of speaking up. Remember, you are not defined by what happens to you but by how you respond to it. You are not a victim unless you choose to remain one. You have power, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the odds seem overwhelming, even when everyone around you is telling you to stay quiet and accept your situation. You have the power to document, to speak up, to seek help, to demand accountability, to create change. Don't let anyone take that power away from you. Don't let fear or shame or uncertainty keep you silent. Your voice matters, your truth matters, your justice matters. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear your story, needs to know they're not alone, needs to see that fighting back is possible, and sometimes, just sometimes, it actually works. Be that inspiration for someone else the way I hope I've been, that inspiration for you today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of this community. Until next time, keep living through it. Keep fighting for what's right, and keep believing that justice is possible.